Welcome to this episode of the Cold Dead Hands podcast with your hosts, Dr. Benjamin Dowd-Arrow and resident firebrand Brett Cross. Sit back, get comfortable, and enjoy as they bring you the stories told from the cold dead hands.
Hello and welcome back to Stories from the Cold Dead Hands, a radio show dedicated to lifting the voices of survivors and their families of victims up to tell the stories of people who were lost to gun violence. I am one of your hosts, Dr. Benjamin Dowd-Arrow. I am a internationally recognized gun scholar, having published numerous publications on guns and well-being, as well as the social determinants of guns, like why would people want them, why do they support certain policies. My co-host tonight is Brett Cross. Brett?
I am the father of Uziyah Garcia, who was gunned down in the Robb Elementary massacre in Uvalde, Texas on May 24th, 2022. Since then, we have been fighting tirelessly to make sure that he is not a statistic, that he is remembered for who he was, and making sure that his legacy continues on and changes laws and changes lives, because no matter what we say or do, it will not bring him back, but it could potentially save you and your child from, living the same fate that we live.
So tonight's a little bit different. We do not have a guest. Our guest was not able to join us tonight. So tonight's just me and Brett, and it's kind of fitting. Brett, you want to tell them what today is?
So today, August 12th, was the first day of school, which is extremely hard every year. It was a little bit harder this year. Uzi would have been starting 7th grade. He would have been officially in junior high. And tomorrow happens to be his birthday. So he would have started school today, and tomorrow he would have turned 13. He'd officially have been a teenager. So it's just been extremely hard. Seeing back to school posts always make me happy, seeing that other children are alive, are well, and are able to continue. But at the same time, it, just reinforces my knowing that Uzi will never have that. He'll never have anything past May 24th. So it's just, it's been extremely hard. It's hard on me. It's hard on my wife. It's hard on my kids. Because once again, I have another son who is a few months younger. That was in the same grade. So he started 7th grade without his brother. And my youngest is 10 and in the 4th grade. And it's hard for them to comprehend that they are Uzi's age and that they're in Uzi's grade, and that this year, at the end of this year, they will be older and in a grade that Uzi never made it to. So it's just hard as hell.
Yeah. That I can totally understand, right? Like, I think there's an anxiousness for those of us who haven't lost children on that first day of school, just because of what America has become, what we have seen it do, with the gun violence in America. But for a person who has lost a child, this has got to be really, really hard, especially when it would have been his birthday tomorrow, and especially when we consider what else happened in the last 72 hours. If you want to pick up on that, Brett.
Yeah, so these last few days have been extremely taxing as well, because I believe it was Thursday or Friday, possibly, I cannot remember which one. CNN interviewed Pete Arredondo, who was the acting chief of police. Well, not the acting, he was the chief of police for the school district, who you can hear him in the hallways telling them to not go in, to wait for keys, to I know that there are victims in there, but let's time is on our side. We'll deal with that later. Things of that nature. And CNN gave him a platform to speak and spew his he's trying to say that he's innocent and everything like that. And it's just, I'm really, the media has me really pissed off these days. I've always had a love-hate relationship with them, because if it wasn't for the media, we wouldn't have gotten the answers that we have. But at the same time, they exploit and they do these things just for dollars, and they don't care about our tragedy. They don't care about our pain. They don't care about the anguish. All they care about is making the story first. So CNN interviewed Arredondo, and it was just completely ridiculous. um I mean, he goes and he says, "Oh, I'm being scapegoated." That's what he tries to say a lot. He's like, "Oh, I'm scapegoated." And scapegoating, it means that you are accused of other people's wrongdoings and that you didn't do anything wrong, which is completely false. He did wrong.
Mhm.
Um, is he being singled out with another officer? Absolutely, and I'd agree with that 100%. There should be more than two of them being charged. But scapegoated not. And then he wants to turn around. He's asked, hey, can you walk us through what you're thinking during these video clips? And he wants to say, oh, I can't watch these clips. It's too hard for me. And these are my kids too. You got to understand that. That is the most disrespectful thing I've ever heard in my entire life. If they were your kids, you would have went in. You know, there were,
Well, we saw that, right? To interrupt real quick, right? We saw that. We saw officers go in and get their own kids, but not allow parents to try and save, like, your child, for instance.
yeah, absolutely. And that's the most infuriating thing, because at one point he goes, to anybody that calls us coward, and I'm not talking verbatim here, but it's they're calling us cowards, but I guarantee 100% of the people have never been in the situation. You don't have to be in the situation. Y'all were keeping parents out, parents who were trying to get in and save their children's lives and all the children's lives, while y'all were sitting out there waiting for keys, waiting for, they kept asking for more ARs. They kept asking for more shields. And, I'm trying to figure out what that magic number for them was, because they had 376 officers. All of them have a service weapon. So did they need 400 to take on the one? 500? Like, what was I'm
Well,
just
and that goes,
completely frustrated.
and to kind of dive into that real quick, right? Like that goes back into this whole idea of the good guy with the gun narrative, right? Like the NRA says, oh, it takes a good guy with a gun to stop a bad guy with a gun. And I've shown in videos and things and in talks how, like, if we're defining good guy with a gun as a police officer, then that's the only time we ever see these people ever stopped, right? Like, because Jim Bob down the street statistically is not going to stop one of these people. It's a very small number that are stopped by people that are quote unquote civilians, and of those civilians, they're almost always off-duty law enforcement or like former military or off duty military, right? They're not, like I said, Jim Bob down the street. But here is a situation where there were 376 good guys with a gun, right? Defining it by that metric, and they could not stop a single shooter, a single person, right? Like, they knew there was only one, right? Now I know that like FBI training teaches you, like, you say 1+1, right? It's always one more than you see. But they had pretty much like come to a realization that it was just one person, and yet 77 minutes, 77 minutes.
Oh yeah. And they knew within the first few minutes that it was just the one shooter, because he had shot his grandmother in the head. It was just him. Like, they knew these things. They knew, like, and I don't want to jump forward too far, because I know we're going to talk about this later, but with the evidence dump that they, or the information dump that they just did, right? I went through the other day on my Twitch, and I had never seen it before, but we watched them all together, just, right there. And it shows within the time of one of the officers who was the first one there, within 3 to 4 minutes, they knew it was an AR. They knew it was a single person. They knew which room it was in, and still nothing. This is well before 10 minutes of the whole thing. So if they would have done like how active shooting trains you to, the alert system trains you to. It is stop the shooting, stop the killing, stop the bleeding. That's what it is. So I do not understand why, this narrative is being pushed around by all these officers that, oh, well, this guy told us not to. Screw that. Like, children are dying. When are you going to put lives above your own job? If one of these officers would have gotten fired for going in there and saving our children, we would have fought hard as hell for him, right? Like, and that's what we needed. So it's this narrative that, oh, well, we weren't scared. We weren't scared, but we needed keys. We needed keys to an unlocked door. We needed shields. We needed this. We needed that. Like, all of these things. And at one point, I've went through and I've listened to all the interviews and everything that I possibly can. At one point, Arredondo was like, I heard him reloading. If you heard him reloading, then you knew that he didn't have any ammo. Then why didn't you go in? Like, these are all things that just irritate me. The more you look into this and the more you see, like, yeah, on the surface, everybody knows that Uvalde felt. Everybody knows. But when you actually like watch the body cam, watch the statements, everything like that, read all the documents, it is quite clear that the only thing that stopped them was they put their lives over our children's.
Yeah. And, this goes back to something else too, like, because we hear a lot of these pro gun nuts say things like, oh, I could stop a mass shooting, right? But, they're not trained. They're, I call them gravy seals, right? Like, they play a lot of Call of Duty and some paintball, right? And they think
Screen berets.
Yeah, they think that translates into like some kind of real life skill. But like, what people don't understand is that even a Marine can choke, right? Because you don't know what you're going to do in a situation like that until you're in that situation. And, like, I've never seen 376 people freeze before, right? But like, people do freeze or run or hide, right? Like we saw with not Sandy Hook, Parkland, right? The officer that was on duty when Parkland happened hid in their car, like hid to get away, right? People, like, even with training, don't know how they'll actually react to a real life situation. And, here is a setup where we see that here are a group of people that are in this position. A lot of cops are in this position because they claim because they want to help people, right? But what we often see is them bullying people, right? If that had been an unarmed black man, how fast do you think it would have gone inside?
Oh, and instantly.
Right. And but because he had an AR-15 and suddenly I could get shot, right? And possibly killed, I'm not going inside, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to deal with it. And to me, like, every one of them should be fired. Every single one.
Absolutely.
Because, your job is to go inside. If you don't come home, that's part of the job, right?
Signed up for it.
Don't do that job. You don't,
That's why I don't.
think about like firefighters, right? Like, firefighters is one of the most dangerous jobs in America. I have never seen someone who is a trained firefighter refuse to run into a burning building.
Could you imagine seeing that though? Like the firefighters pull up, there's 50 of them, and they just look at the building. They're like, yeah, no,
Yeah, not going to do it, right? Like, if you can't do the job you've signed up for, whatever that means, right? It might mean you don't come home. Then don't do the job. Let somebody else step up that'll do the job, right?
exactly.
And for 376 people to stand outside for 77 minutes. And I'm not going to play any of those clips on the show tonight, but you and I both listened to it, and you can hear the kids. You can hear them in the background screaming for help.
Yeah.
And this went on for 77. How many could have been saved?
Oh, several. Absolutely. And the thing is, in touching back on what you just said, you don't know what you would do in these situations. And I agree with that. But at the same time, I saw what the hundreds of parents outside were trying to do, my wife being one of them. She was outside trying to get past the police. And that's the difference, right? Like, yeah, the good guy with the gun conspiracy, or not conspiracy, but the whole that narrative is such BS. Um, because the only people that wanted to go in and save kids were parents. And they
Right.
didn't care if they saved their kid. I mean, they wanted to save their kids and they wanted to save everybody else's kids. And you had a plethora of officers keeping them out. And that is one of the most infuriating things, too, because if you're not going to do the job, then get out that damn way.
And let others do it.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think watching that body cam footage, listening to those screams,
Mhm.
I mean, that's nightmare material. You know,
Yeah.
it's nightmare material, and I can't imagine being you and hearing that, right? Because of what you lost, and knowing you have to trust these people every day with your children.
Well, I 100% do not. And the thing is like I'll never trust another school district and I'll never trust another cop. Because the biggest failure in police history, the biggest failure in school district history happens to involve my son.
Yeah,
And so I will never uh,
yeah. Real
trust.
quick, too, something we're doing a little different tonight is that while we're streaming across all the platforms, Twitch, YouTube, I am like, reading comments as they come
Absolutely.
across and taking any questions that people might have. But Maddie mentioned that one of the very first officers on the scene had an actual panic attack. I had completely forgotten about that. Like, literally had a panic attack, freaked out, lost their shit.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's like, what we were talking about. If you can't do the job, don't sign up for it. And I'll be the first one because you wouldn't believe the amount of hate mail I've gotten, right? But I've heard people say, "Well, why don't you sign up? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that?" And first of all, it's like I shouldn't have to. Like you're telling somebody who lost a child this, and like yeah, be damned because it's me. I don't care, right? But if you're telling other parents this who have lost children, like this, one makes you an insufferable human being, and two, in my case, I don't want to. I don't want to put my life down on the line every day knowing that, and I know that. So guess what? I never did. I never signed up to be a cop. Guess what? I never did. I never went to the military because I wasn't going to do that. Some people can. And I applaud those people that actually do that. But if you can't, and so side note, real quick. So our new school police, I think we have three that have the three new ones don't have any time in. Like these are their first jobs, right? And thinking about it, it's like, does that scare me or not? Because hell, we had officers that had 24 years of training, 30 years of training and everything, fell that day, and it's like I said, I'm never going to trust, but at the same time, I'm kind of more interested to see how these officers do because one, they haven't been coerced, like they have something to prove, at this point. But I want them to ask themselves, and I want every officer out there to ask themselves, will you die for a child? And if the answer is no, even the slightest bit, if the answer is no, then put down your badge,
Yeah,
put down
yeah.
your
If there's
gun,
any even hesitation,
exactly, and walk away.
walk
And
away.
I won't even be mad at that. I'd appreciate that. And I'm sure anybody else who is in your district would appreciate that because that is what these officers should have done. And when they failed to put down their lives for children on May 24th, every single one of them should have walked away, but they didn't.
One of the records that came out, like I said, we don't name the shooters on the show, but like one of the records came out and said that he had talked about doing something like this, like when he was in middle school.
Yeah. I mean, he got fired from two jobs from threatening to take people out, you know? Uh,
And that, and that kind of leads into like, one of the things we can talk about tonight are, you know, some of the commonalities between a lot of these people, right? Like, first of all, as tragic as things like Uvalde and Sandy Hook and Parkland were, the majority of mass shootings they happen in workplaces, right? Like with somebody who is mad at their coworkers or their boss or something, right? They have some kind of grievance and they begin to obsess over that grievance. And we saw that with him. He had those kinds of tendencies. He was obsessed with like the issues at work, which led to him get fired multiple times. And we saw it go back when, as a kid and having those kind of grievances and wanting to harm teachers, right?
Yep.
And nobody thought we should report this to somebody.
Yeah. No, nobody at all. And that's the thing is like, I'm big on see something and say something, but I understand why school children were afraid to say anything, right? Like I understand that. But as an adult, you're not hearing anything. Like you're not, you know, checking like, oh, this dude seems kind of out of it. Like something seems off. Let's talk to him. Let's try. Like the problem with our society is that we've quit caring, we've quit caring. And
did we ever care? Like, how long has it been since we've cared?
been a while.
Yeah,
if
right.
ever.
Like, I
Yeah.
mean, let's think about like, because like when I was a kid, we had to have literal commercials to remind our parents that they even had children, right? Like there would be a commercial that would come on at like 10 o'clock every night. It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your kids are? Right? Like that's how little like the care has been, but that has it now ingrained itself into all of our institutions. And, does that play a part in why we don't seem to care at all when kids are killed in these events? Because, like, my parents didn't even care that they had kids, right? Like, they, like the in television had to come on and say, hey, you got kids.
Yeah. And it's just, it's wild. It's wild. And there were so many instances that could have stopped this, so many instances where he could have been stopped, where the school district could have done what was right and checked their doors, where the police could have done their job. I mean, he literally walked past an officer could have stopped it. So, I mean, the way that I see Uvalde is like everything screwed up perfectly. If one thing would have changed, I wouldn't be here today. If they would have locked those outer doors, I wouldn't be here today. Right? Like nobody would know who I was. Nobody would know Uziyah. And I'd prefer that.
Honestly, I would too, Brett. As close as you and I are, I would prefer to not know you.
Exactly.
Right. And that's not being, an asshole to you, right? I can be an asshole to you, but that's not what I would, right? That would mean that Uziyah was still alive. And,
absolutely.
Your life would not have been upended the way it has. Right?
Absolutely. And it, like I said, if just one thing would have changed, just one. And these are the kinds of things that'll keep you up at night. Like, why couldn't one person have cared? Why couldn't the superintendent have cared enough to make sure that his principal cared enough to make sure that the maintenance people didn't leave the door unlocked? Why did the shooter's parent not care enough? I mean, it's everything. Why do people not care enough? And then will they care when it happens to them? And that's the craziness about it. Like,
and I've said this before, right? Like this is when we talk about white privilege, right? And white male privilege in particular, this is really what we're talking about is that for people in my demographic, you have to experience something before you actually are even aware to care, right? Like if we think about all the politicians who did not care about LGBTQ issues, and may have even been hostile towards them until one of their kids came out, right?
yep.
Or gun violence until they are a victim or somebody in their family is a victim, right? It is infuriating that it takes something personally happening to somebody for them to actually care about it happening to someone else.
Absolutely. And that's who I was, right? Like I didn't care about anything if it didn't 100% affect me. And it's affected me. And that's why I try to warn people, right? I always say this: it is easier to get out and fight for your children when they're still here, because it is hard as hell to wake up every day and fight. And like I say, I said in the beginning, nothing that me and my wife do or say will ever bring our son back, but it will help prevent another person from experiencing this. And I cannot stress that enough, that you have to get out and fight, and you have to get out and vote and take the steps, because standing on the sideline isn't worth it. It truly isn't.
Yeah. We also saw this week that they began demolition on Sutherland Church, where there was a mass shooting in 2017. I want to say 26 people killed, 22 wounded. You know, they began tearing that church down to rebuild it, kind of like what we saw with Robb Elementary, right?
Oh
Uh,
no, Rob's
it's
not
not
torn
yet.
down yet.
Yeah, but it's in the process, right? Like they
Oh,
are supposed to be.
well, we have people in the community that want to leave it up or turn it into a playground or something for kids. And I'm like, do you really want to play where my son was murdered? I really think that is it goes to show the level of people not caring. Because yeah, we need community centers. We need stuff here for the kids, but do it where blood has been spilled, where children have lost their lives. It's so insensitive that I don't even know if I want to think that people don't realize what they're saying, but being in Uvalde and seeing the lack of care here makes me think that people just do this shit on purpose, man. I really do.
I mean, that leads to a good question too, though. Like, I think you and other families, you know, there might be differing opinions on this. It's like, um, can you turn a building like that into something positive after one of these events? And I think I know your answer, and I'll let you answer in a second. Or is it just irredeemable and it should be erased and, put behind us? Like, because at the end of the day, it's not going to bring back the people lost, right?
Right.
Um, so what should happen to those places? So I'll let you answer that.
So like I said, I try to mention all the time, I only speak for myself and for my wife, and my family. But I do know that there are several families in agreement, and we have talked about this, that we think that no, the building should be wiped out, yes, but putting a park there, putting something like that there is disrespectful. Now, if you would want to put a one of those, and I'm lacking on the word right now, but like a park where you just walk through, like not swings and playgrounds and everything. I think that would be okay, have something that shows, where
Like
our
a
kids were.
memorial.
Yeah. And then turn it into a park, but turn it into a chill park, not something where kids are swinging or on the merry-go-round right where room 111 and 112 were.
Yeah.
Like, that's disrespectful. But I'll also say this, devil's advocate, not all families agree on what should happen. And I'm not just speaking on Uvalde. I'm speaking to about, instances I've seen, people that I know from these different instances. Everybody's going to have different opinions, but it should be left to the families. It shouldn't be left to the school district, shouldn't be left to the city. It should be left to the families, and, majority vote counts.
Yeah, no, I agree with that too. I can totally see that. I mean, I can see putting a park, and even if you had playground equipment, but it would have to be way away from
Yeah.
the events, right? Like that were everywhere where, the violence happened, and even where the cops and everything were all staged. That should be what you were saying, like, a memorial, like a walking paths, like a real chill kind of thing. And then maybe at the far end, the area, that's where the kid playground is, away from where the violence happened. I could see something like that. But I kind of agree. Like, I don't know that you can redeem these places per se. I think that, as long as the families are alive, that it's going to have a scar. It's going to come with it, because you wouldn't go to that park.
Oh,
Right?
it's stained.
Yeah, you wouldn't go there. You wouldn't take your kids there. Your kids wouldn't go there. The other victims' families would not go there, and even some of the survivors' families would not go there. Right? Like, they would
Right.
avoid it, because of just the memories. So to me, I almost think like leveling it and turning it into a parking lot is a better option than, you know, than leaving it up as a reminder, or leaving it up with this like a park or something to like try and hide it, because the people who lived there and experienced it and actually were impacted by it directly are never going to look at that and say, oh, this is beautiful.
Yeah, honestly, I would be happy if they demolished the building and then just put a big ass billboard right there that says, "This is where children died because our government didn't do anything." I would be more happy with that. Like,
Yeah.
let's do that. Like, y'all want reminders, and or y'all want to move on, but I want y'all to be reminded, you know? So let's remind them, because that's the problem with things like putting a park there and everything like that. It's literally telling us, oh, move on. Your kid died, but I'm gonna let my kid swing on a swing where your child was murdered. That's the level of disrespect that I feel
Yeah.
from that. So I would rather them just, like I said, let's just put up a billboard that says, this is where 376 officers were too afraid of one guy with a gun. Let's make changes.
Yeah. 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 And
But
going back, going back to what we were saying about like the newly released information, right? Um, all kinds of things have been made public now, right? Like some of the 911 calls, some of the body cam footage that had not been shown, especially if the cops just standing around, right? We mentioned Arredondo saying that he could hear him reload,
yeah,
right? Um, what are your thoughts? Because I have mixed feelings. What are your thoughts on all of this being released to the public?
so my biggest issue, I've said this from the beginning, because they continue to hide, the city, the state, the school, the county, everyone continues to hide information because they don't want to be sued. They don't want to admit fault. They don't want to take any accountability. So I've said since the beginning, show everything. And this is my personal thought. Like I said, I don't speak for all the families, I speak for mine. Show everything up until our children's bodies. And then if a family wants to show that, well, then that's their prerogative, right? Show everything. Let us see, like, because this isn't TV for us. We don't get to just turn it off of the news and, oh, well, that sucks. Let me go finish my game of categories or whatever that you're doing with your life. We
Mhm.
don't get to do that. This is an everyday thing. So I want people to feel uncomfortable. I
Mhm.
do. I truly want people to feel uncomfortable, because if you're uncomfortable, you will do everything in your power to make yourself not uncomfortable. And if fighting for stricter gun laws makes you not uncomfortable, then that's what I want. But your level of uncomfortable seeing this stuff is nowhere near my level of uncomfortable of not having my child. So I'm for showing it. My issue is the media releasing it before the families get to see it. That
Yeah.
is my issue, right? This whole thing of the media releasing information before we got to see it started in the very beginning by a news station in Austin. right? So we were supposed to see the hallway footage before the whole world got to see it. We were supposed to see it on a Sunday with no sound at all. We weren't going to hear it or anything. It was just going to be the footage. Well, we're in DC. A lot of the families are in DC, and all of a sudden we get a phone call that, oh, this station in Austin is about to play it. We call, we're crying, we're begging them not to play it. Like, just let us see it first, and then you can show it after that, but let us see it first. We were calling. We had federal senators, federal House representatives calling this station saying, just let the family see it first. And the person who showed it pretty much just said, screw you, I want ratings. And so it started then in July of 2022 is when it started. And ever since then, the only information that we get is from the media, but the media shows it to the world, and we have to see it as the same time. So imagine you know when your child's last moments are, and you get to see it when the whole world does.
Yeah.
It's extremely frustrating, and I can't talk
disrespectful as fuck.
absolutely, and I can't talk too much mess on like all of it. I won't say all of media is a bad thing. I would say it's a good half and half, because I have had I've gotten really close with some reporters who literally care about the families and care about the pain and care about the hurt, and they see themselves as human first and journalists second. And those people are so amazing. If they're running a story that they know is going to be hard, they'll call us and they'll show us and they'll tell us and let us see everything. But it's the reporters that just get information and just start spewing it before we get to see it. Those are the assholes. And those are the ones that shouldn't have these jobs, because first and foremost, like I said, you're supposed to be a human, not a journalist. A journalist is a job. A human is who you are. Be a human. Do not put your job over other people's feelings.
Yeah.
It's irresponsible.
Yeah. I mean, and that's why we do this radio show, right? Like, because the reality is that most of the media is just trying to drive up clicks and drive up views, and so they'll do shit like that, right? Like that's why they name the shooters, right? And they spend so much time talking about the shooter, because they know that sensationalism will drive people to the platform to hear about it, right? Because they won't get the same kind of engagement if they spent an entire broadcast talking about Uziyah, right? Or any of the other children lost, right? They may spend one episode of like one of their news broadcasts on it, but then the other 90 are going to be focused on whatever drives the clicks and the views.
Oh yeah.
It's sensational.
Even in a single, like, I've literally done hour and a half interviews that they have clipped down to 2 minutes, and it's not mentioned Uzi at all.
Yeah.
Like, and that's the
usually
thing.
Uvalde victim or student, killed, right?
Yeah.
They or they just say the 22, right? Like they don't even they don't humanize
No. Yeah. They'll act like, oh, we want to tell Uzi's story. And then I say, I spend 30 minutes talking about him, and then they're like, well, what do you want to see? And I'm like, assault weapons ban. And then that's the headline. Uvalde dad wants to see assault weapons ban. Like, you took what would get you clicks, not the emotion pouring out, not me telling you, how Uzi would play basketball on his hoverboard, not my stories about, him not getting permission from his friend's mom to come and stay over. So he has to call me at 9 o'clock at night, telling me to come, asking to come pick him up, because him and his friend, decided that they were just going to stay the night at his friend's house and not ask the parents. None of these stories about how his laugh just made you forget any pain. None of these stories, they don't matter to a lot of these organizations because it's not money.
Doesn't, I was going to say it doesn't sell newspapers, right?
Yeah.
Like, granted newspapers are really a thing of the past, but like, you know what I mean, right? Like it doesn't get ad revenue. It doesn't drive up engagement. No one's beating down our doors to offer us $1 million, multi-million dollar deal for this radio show, right? Like, because at the end of the day, all these places care about is sensationalism that drives traffic to the website. And that, I think, is harmful. I think that's a lot. I think a lot of that is harmful because then it puts the focus on, these people, which then causes copycats. So in criminology, there's this idea called contagion, and it basically says that if the media spends too much time talking about, a mass shooter, then there's a statistical probability that another event will happen within 2 weeks. And, it can be as many as 3 events, which is why we often see 2 or 3 of these events in a row. Right.
Yep.
And then by the time the 3rd event happens, the media is all burned out talking about mass shootings that they don't even talk about the last one or whatever. And then it kind of dies off. Right. And we saw that on Valentine's Day. We saw that while you were in Washington, D.C. With March for Our Lives to push the shot line. How many did we have? 5?
Yeah.
5?
Yeah. So we were with Change the Ref, and in DC alone, there was 2.
Yeah.
While I was in DC alone, there was 2. There was the Kansas City parade. There was a high school in Georgia, and then there was
the
one
Winter Gardens Mall in Palm City or West Palm.
5.
Yeah, 5.
And guess which one they talked about?
Yep.
The one that drew clicks because it was football players.
Yep. Well, even you got how many mass shootings can we name of that? Like, can we name right now that got either no or minimal like attention?
Oh,
because it wasn't sensational enough.
a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, the first one that comes to my mind is Santa Fe, and it's right down the road. And I bring up Santa Fe because today is also Kimberly Vaughn's birthday. She would have been 21 this year. Her mother, Rhonda Hart, is actually running for Congress. So, but that was Texas. It's right down the road. I didn't hear really anything about it. You hear it, that first explosion of news for a day or 2, and then nothing. It went away because it was a really red area. They didn't want to talk about it. They tried to hush people up. The governor lied to them, said that he was going to take care of it, and then nothing. Right. And it's taken people like Rhonda to fight, to make sure Rhonda and Rosie Stone and all of them who have lost children there to actually fight and be like, no, we lost kids too. This happened, but it wasn't sensationalized enough for their liking because it just wasn't.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think that they should, I honestly think that they should show this type of footage over and over on the TV. We glorify violence. You have your John Wicks and your Rambos and everything like that. Everybody loves it. Well, let's show the counter to that. Let's show where it's not, movies being badass and cool or anything. Show the devastation of the guns. Show the hallway where my son was drug out, where there's blood everywhere, because we see that in this new footage, and they're walking right over it. They're walking right over where our children were just dragged out of the thing, and these officers are walking through it like it's nothing. Show that. Show the realness.
Maddie mentioned that we never honor our victims, and talking about Midland, that there's no memorial, right, for Midland. And we see that. And Maddie also mentioned that, while Sandy Hook got a memorial, it was in multiple cities, right? Like all the kids finally got memorialized across the United States. Yeah, we see how like a lot of these people are forgotten because the media moves on to the next one, right? Because there's so many happening. They don't even stick around talking with unless you're super vocal like you and Nikki are, right? Like, if you were not super vocal, they probably wouldn't be talking with anybody from Uvalde anymore, right?
Well,
Like,
and see, and I'll take it a step further, right? I don't think it's just the media, because in firsthand experience, with like Uvalde, right? The city wants people to move on because it's bad for business, right? Well, we're not moving on. We were guaranteed in the beginning. They said the city square, right in the middle of town, we were going to have our children's memorials there. They said it in the very beginning. Then when, that first wave of media kind of went away, they're like, no, we don't want it there. It's an eyesore. We want people want to move on. There's no moving on. And it's disrespectful and a slap in the face to my son who died there for you to just be like, it is what it is. It's not, it's not. So I would, the media does move on super quick, but it's also these towns. It's also, especially in these red areas where they're like, oh, it's not the gun. Well, then tell me how my son got shot with something that wasn't a gun, right? Like, in that it's politics, it's media, it's a conglomerate of different things that go into it. And it's just, at
yeah.
the end of the day, people are dead and you don't care.
Well, and going back to that whole idea that, we hear that argument a lot, right? It's not the gun. It's not the gun. Why, regulating the gun, it doesn't happen. Gun doesn't shoot itself. Well, I mean, there are plenty of cases where guns do go off all by themselves with no human, like, touching the trigger or anything. But even beyond that, laws don't actually, for the most part, don't actually regulate the gun per se. It's the people's access to the gun or the people themselves, right?
Exactly.
Like, really, if there were like laws for the guns, it would be safety features like we see with automobiles, right? Like, there's a reason that gun deaths have like surpassed automobile deaths for children, because automobiles get safer and safer every year while we've done nothing to improve like guns, right? I could think of like multiple things like biometric features we could put on a gun to prevent somebody from firing it who was not registered to that gun, for instance, right?
Exactly.
That would stop guns stolen in crime and being used in crime. It would prevent somebody from like taking a gun, like, we saw in Sandy Hook, taking, the parents' guns and using it. It would basically like limit who could actually fire that weapon. But the NRA says that might make like too much of a delay, right? That second or two it takes for the gun to recognize the owner could be too much. My iPhone opens up immediately, right? Like, I think that's an acceptable turnaround.
Not just that, but that feature right there would help with safe storage, for like in cases like Ethan Song, who lost his life because a gun wasn't stored correctly. And yes, they always talk about that. Oh, it takes too long. Oh, it takes too long. I have about biometric lockbox for mine, and it takes all of 1 second for me to use my thumb, put it on there, and it pops right open and it's right there.
Yep.
So it's not that, but it's, if we start putting these measures in place, then they can't blame it on anything else. They have to recognize that it's the gun, you
Right.
know? And
Well,
that the same thing with the mental illness.
yeah, that's what I was about to jump to, right? Like, I was going to segue into that because, like, we constantly see, like, Greg Abbott, for instance, blaming mental illness, right? Donald
Yeah.
Trump blaming mental illness. Greg Abbott, though, I use him specifically because he cut funding for mental health funding in the state of Texas. His
$211 million.
constituents, yeah, his constituents aren't going to look at that. They're just going to hear him say, yeah, we need to solve the mental health problem, and think that he's doing something while he is secretly cutting that funding. But it goes back to what you just said, that if they solve mental health, right? Like, if they get everybody mental health checkups and better mental health services, and the problem still exists, then we know it's not mental health, it's the gun. And so mental health remains the boogeyman that they can throw up and be like, oh, no, it's this. It's not,
Mhm.
it's not the firearm.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, you can even take that even further. So, when they say, because, people won't listen to reason about that. So then they're like, oh, well, every country has mental health. You're correct. You're 100% correct. But why does America have so many gun deaths? And they're like, well, more guns make us safer. No, it doesn't, because even if you just dumb it down to the most basic, let me use crayons to describe this to you, how many shootings can you have if there are 0 guns?
Yep. Yeah, and I mean the math
0.
shows, right? The math shows that more guns means more gun homicides, right? I believe it's every town. They have an entire thing up for like a lot of the major cities in the United States to show how like guns are correlated with homicides, right? Like the number owned is correlated with homicides. And it is shocking that, you know, states that have some of the highest concentration of ownership also have the highest gun homicides, suicides, mass shootings, accidental deaths, right? You know, like if you look at like California versus Texas, California like has a rate of like 9 per 100,000. Texas is like 15.4 or something.
Yeah. And then it's so hard to even like understand where people are coming from. Like if they're just this blind or if they're just this indoctrined to believe these things, you know, because
So this will be my praise to the NRA, right? Like, and to Republicans, that they are really good at messaging, and the left is
marketing.
not. Right. Because they have learned how to create these marketable tweet phrases, right? Like these 120 to 200 character tweets, right? That like sound plausible when you hear it, right? You know, until you do critical thinking, right? Like the good guy with a gun to stomp a bad guy with a gun on the surface, that seems like it might make sense, right? Like,
Yeah.
like if the bad guy's got a gun, the good guy's got to have one, right? It's not until you start critically thinking and deconstructing like what they're saying and thinking about all the context around it that you're like, that doesn't make any fucking sense.
Yeah.
That
No,
argument does
exactly.
not make sense, right? Even think about the way we frame it, though. We say gun control versus gun rights. On one side sounds like freedom, the other side sounds like a dictatorship, authoritarianism, right?
Yep.
So like they're really good at marketing. They're really good at these, you know, headline buzzwords, like, you know, ways to make people think that, yeah, this makes sense. And
Yep.
the left is not good at that.
Exactly. I mean, and you can even take it to like the assault weapon ban. When you say assault weapon ban, people automatically are like, oh, well, you're not coming to get my gun. Nobody's trying to take it, right? Like nobody has said that. An assault weapons ban is a pipeline freeze. It stops the creation of new. Nobody's going to come to your house. Nobody wants to, right? And if the government really wanted to, then, you know, the guy with the drone in the Pentagon or whatever is going to take it anyways. Like you won't have to worry about it because you'll be gone, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it is a lot to do with phrasing and everything. But I think that the problem even there is that we're real literal. Like gun violence is an issue. Well, my guns never killed nobody. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's like on the surface, it's real literal, but people just can't understand that. And then when you think about that, then you got to think, well, why do people think this way? And then it's education, and our education system's failing, because if the government keeps people dumb, then they can't really have an uprising. If these people that wanted the uprising against the tyrannical government, if they really wanted one, people would get educated first. You know, that's the way that
once
you
they
do
got
it.
educated, they realized they can't win. Noah points out, like,
Exactly.
you know, in that moment, it's impossible to tell who the good guy with the gun is, right?
Exactly.
Like, you can't tell who it is, but if you take away everybody's guns, magically that death toll is going to drop, right? Like,
Well,
you
and
know,
I put it this way. Because it's always, oh, you know, your shooter, he had mental health problems. Okay. I'm not gonna argue that, right? Like obviously something has to be cuckoo cuckoo in your head for you to go and shoot up an elementary school. Nobody's denying that. But tell me, how many kids could he have killed if he's as crazy as people want to say, then it's not the guns, it's mental health. If he walked in there with a sock full of rocks, how many kids could he have killed? And I am going to say 100% that number would have been 0, because there were 3 teachers there that could have taken him down.
Yeah.
Plus, Uzi was fast as shit, so he would have outran, right? But guess what? He couldn't outrun
Right.
an AR.
Yep.
And what is the weapon that kept 376 officers at bay? An AR. Like when
Well,
you just,
the Las Vegas shooting, same thing, right? Like in
yes,
15, right? Like we have, and it, and you'll see these gun nuts. They'll argue, well, the 223 556 is not as lethal as other types of ammunition. That's absolutely true. The problem is, though, is other types of guns can't fire the
as
number
rapidly.
of bullets. They don't have the clip size. They don't have the firing mechanisms to fire
Well,
as quickly with as little recoil as an AR-15 has. So the AR-15 makes the act of killing easier.
absolutely. And I could be wrong on my numbers. I don't think I am, but I could be wrong with my numbers. Our shooter fired 164 rounds in 26 seconds, I believe it was. I could be off a few numbers either way.
And that sounds about right, right?
Can
Like
you do
I don't
that with
remember.
a shotgun? Like, can you do that with a handgun? Even the fastest people at 164 rounds? Absolutely not. And yes, other bullets can do damage, but I can tell you what that 5.56 round did to my son. I can tell you that it entered small, but he didn't have a stomach afterwards.
Yeah. I
When
mean,
we're
you
having
got a
his
tattoo to
funeral,
show, right? Like you got
yeah,
a tattoo to show for it. Yeah. I mean, and then you have like the Supreme Court, you know, uh, yeah, speak so that you'll show up on the camera when you, uh,
yeah, I'm here.
so, the Supreme Court like made bump stocks legal again, right? And that was used to do a massive number of fatalities in Las Vegas, right?
Yeah.
Imagine had he had one of those.
Yeah. Well, and if he would have got his was it called a hellfire trigger? I think that these are also things that we need to look into to ban as well. And I don't think that they're talked about enough. The bump stocks are talked about. That hellfire trigger that he had would have almost turned that gun into a fully auto, which is more devastating. And for the people out there, and I mean, honestly, if you're listening to this, you're probably on our side of things, right? Like you're really not going to listen to us shitting on you all the time if you're one of these people. But um these for the people that are against laws or whatever, one, we know that laws are not like absolute, that they won't protect everything, they won't fix everything, but literally laws are just a barrier to prevent it or to make it harder to actually do, right? And so when people are like, oh, an assault weapons ban won't stop nothing, well, when we had the fully auto ban, which I know, it's not a real ban, you have to have $10,000, you have to have your FFL, all that bullshit that normal everyday citizens can't do. Do you know how many mass shootings have happened with a fully auto weapon since that ban went into
Less
place?
than 5.
3.
Yeah, that's what I was to say. I thought it was like 3, 4.
Yep.
It
So
was
the
less than
numbers
5.
don't lie.
And for those listening that may not know what he meant by Hellfire trigger, so that is a attachment that you put on the back of a trigger system that causes the trigger to return faster to the initial firing position, which then allows you to fire the gun faster, right? So already a weapon that can be fired really fast, right? Can be turned into almost fully auto. If he had that combined with a bump stock, it would have been a fully automatic weapon.
Oh, 100%. I mean, right there, you don't even have to do it. You pull the trigger the first time and it takes care of itself. And not just that, but people don't seem to realize this is a kid that had never fired a gun before. This was his first time. This is the amount of damage that he did with this weapon. This was his first time. And he followed the law. That's the thing that really frustrates me. He followed the law. He tried not to. He asked multiple people to get him an assault rifle before he was 18, but they wouldn't because laws were in place. And so when the law finally allowed him to buy one, he bought one. And I believe it was 4 or 5 days later, my son's dead.
Yeah, it was less than a week. He attacked, and that leads to, like one of the common sense gun measures that I believe we should have in place is that if you're under, 21 at minimum, right, you shouldn't even be able to buy a gun, right? Like I would say
Absolutely.
it actually should be 25, unless you're in the military or law enforcement or a job that requires you to have a gun, because your frontal lobes aren't fully developed, like your impulse controls and things not fully developed, and we see these events happen a lot with these mid-20s, especially with weapons like the AR-15, you know and we can't generalize all of them to that age range, right? Like, because mass shooters range from, like, I think the youngest on record is like 14 and the oldest is like 84,
Yeah.
right? But when we start looking at where those averages start to fall, it's between 25 and 35, right? So that could at least maybe reduce a lot of those, right? Because it's not like you're not using an AR to defend yourself, right?
No.
You're not using an AR to hunt,
No.
right? So if it's just for play pretty, right, to go to the range or to carry
For
around
that
back in
Rambo
Texas,
moment.
right, then you can wait till you're older to get it. Your gun rights aren't being restricted.
Not just that, but here's my thing. Where is the age limit, period? Right? So one of the issues that we were going through in Texas when we were just trying to raise the age, they were like, oh, well, that's taking away rights. Well, to buy a handgun in Texas, you have to be 21. So did that not take away rights? Right.
Yep.
And just that, but that age range or that age to buy it, that's an arbitrary number because who picked that number?
Yep.
Right. If, oh, you're taking away, well, then you're taking away the rights of my 6-year-old who wants to own a fully auto. Right. Like
But
then
Missouri's trying to pass a law that allows that.
oh, fucking course. It's past 9. Oh, fucking course.
All right, let's do our reset. So hello everyone who is still listening to us tonight. We are here tonight on the Stories from the Cold Dead Hands, a radio show dedicated to talking about those who are left behind, the victims that we lost, all of those who have been lost to us because of senseless gun violence in this country. I am one of your hosts. I'm Dr. Benjamin Dowd-Arrow. I am a gun scholar. I have been recognized internationally for my research, having published numerous publications on guns and well-being and the social determinants of gun ownership. In other words, why do people own guns, as well as the social determinants of gun policy support. So why do people want certain gun policies passed? My co-host tonight is Brett Cross.
Yeah, I'm Brett Cross, and I lost my son Uzi in the Uvalde Robb Elementary massacre, and I am pissed off, tired, I'm hurting, and I am just spending the rest of my life fighting for my son, who would have turned 13 tomorrow.
Yeah, I think that makes tonight's episode even more bittersweet, right? Like, I mean, these episodes are never easy for either one of us, right?
No.
Like, we talk about, that we hear people's stories, and it's really hard to make either one of us cry in public, right?
Yeah.
Like, but there have been times both of us hearing some of the stories on this show, we've been like, damn, right? And I think it's because we have become, every time we hear it, we've become resigned to the fact that it's never going to end. It's never going to stop. And people are going to continue to lose family members, parents, brothers, sisters, kids, right? Because the people who are responsible for keeping us safe refuse to fucking do it.
Yeah.
They refuse to do it because either they're in the pocket of the gun lobby, or it would, their own lives are worth more, right? As is the case with the Uvalde police.
Yeah. Yeah, and the problem is that we're resigned to think that it'll never end, but it could if people would just get their heads out their asses. Like it literally could.
But
And
okay, so like here's an actual story that happened this week, right? That a few weeks ago, the Surgeon General declared gun violence an epidemic, right?
Finally.
3 days ago, he said that to solve it, and this just shows how little we want to do to fucking solve this problem, we should put warning labels on guns.
Dear fuck.
Warning labels on firearms. like an advisory, like we would put on a pack of cigarettes.
Okay. Where are we putting this at? Right? Are we putting it on the muzzle where you're when somebody's aiming it at you, you can read warning, you might be dead. Like, is
May
that what we're
cause death,
doing?
right? Like
Is
it's
that
going to
what
be
we're
written on
fucking
the
doing?
side. Though these amosexuals would probably love that,
Dear God.
right? Like I'm
Dude.
thinking now, like when I read that story, I was thinking about, I don't know if you've seen the movie Thank You for Smoking. But in it, it's about like these three lobbyists for alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, right? And they call themselves the merchants of death. And the guy that's the head of the firearm lobbying is like, any negative stereotype, he's like, yeah, it's cool. Our people love it.
No, for
Like,
real.
like, so I can imagine the NRA would probably love it if they put, if the Surgeon General made every gun manufacturer put something like, warning, this can cause death on the side of a firearm.
Yeah, America, yee. This is gonna kill. Yeah, no, I can totally see them going along with it. And not just that, but like I don't know if you saw it a few weeks ago. It's shit's been so hectic that I didn't even really get to talk about it. They are putting ammo
Oh,
vending machines.
vending machines.
So yeah, and this is in Texas, right?
Texas, Oklahoma, and Alabama, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, so just your regular ordinary day. We're gonna go get ice. We're gonna get a few sodas from the vending machine. Oh, don't forget your 9mm ammo because you never know what we're gonna need with it. Why is it becoming so acceptable? And why? Like they were proud.
One of my mutuals on TikTok, he's a pro gun person, right? Like he heard that and was like floored. It's like, no, that is not a good idea. And he's one of those people that's like, yeah, we need to expand rights as much as possible, right? And he heard that they were going to put it in vending machines. He's like, are they fucking stupid?
Well, did you read it right? They're like, oh, you have to use your ID and everything like that. Oh, yeah, because a crowbar and a fucking hammer isn't going to open it up. And that's just free ammo for people at this point. Free ammo for people.
Devil's advocate going back, thinking about like the way that you buy it, right? You have to show your ID and have your face scanned. Gun registry.
Yeah. As soon as you said that, I was thinking the same thing, which, Mr. The orange overlord, right? Who was against anything going against guns and everything. Trump had a registry.
Right. And I've not seen that confirmed by any real like major news sources, but I have seen a couple of like questionable ones post that. But let's assume for a minute it is true, right? Like here, I said at the overturning of Roe v. Wade that the right to privacy, right? Roe v. Wade was just about privacy. That was all it was about. It was not about an abortion, right? That just happened to be the subtext that led to the right to privacy. Roe v. Wade was the first court case to say you had a constitutional right to privacy, okay? The overturning of Roe v. Wade then means that we don't have a right to privacy. The reason we do not have a gun registry is historically linked to this idea that we have a right to privacy, right? In 1986, when they passed the Firearms Act under Reagan, that made it where the Secretary of the Treasurer, because they would assume that a registry would go under the Department of Commerce, right? Interstate Commerce, also the Treasury, right? They said that the Treasury Department can't make a registry of guns because people have a right to privacy, but we don't have one anymore, right? That's overturned. So now they can make whatever they want. They can make a gun registry, and there's not a damn thing people can do about it because you no longer have an expectation of privacy.
So what you're saying is I should go and start pushing for this because you want to take away Roe v. Wade, which takes away women's rights and women's health care and everything. Well, then let's go full force with this, right? Let's register our guns.
And the first gun registry was done after the revolution, right? The very first one. It was done by the guy who would become the first Supreme Court Justice of the United States.
Yeah.
That's who conducted the first gun registry in in the U.S. And so it is in the historical history, right? Like, which is one of the things that the originalists argue that has to be done for something to be constitutional, is it has to be part of the original tradition. And the fact that we had John Jay, the first Supreme Court Justice of the United States, before he took on that job, conducted a gun registry and assessment, so that if we had to go to war with Britain again, we would know how many guns we had and who had them and whatever, right? Before we even had a constitution, right?
Well, let me ask you this real quick. And I'm just going to throw out a random year here, and you being the fucking know-it-all that you are, probably know this. How many mass shootings were there in 1812?
Not very fucking many,
if any, right?
I think the very first one was at a school in like 1850-ish on a Native American reservation,
Right.
where
How many people were involved?
less than 10. It basically he came in to kill the white teacher, the native did, to get back at them for kidnapping their kids.
Right.
And I think 3 people died.
Right. And that's the first one, like
that's the first one I can
in recorded history,
yeah.
pretty much.
Pretty much.
So, and before that, there was a registry, and you couldn't really fire enough rounds. I see. And going back on the Constitution and everything, and let me pick your mind on this, because you study this like crazy. But I just realized, and I wrote about it the other day, so I'm going to read my notes and everything. But from what I'm reading, the Second Amendment doesn't actually give the citizens the right. It gives the militia, as we know, right?
Right.
And therefore, it makes it a state's law to give people the right? So, like, for instance, the Texas state constitutional provision, Article 1, Section 23 in Texas says every citizen shall have the right to keep and bear arms in the lawful defense of himself or the state, but the legislature shall have power by law to regulate the wearing of arms with a view to prevent crime. With that being said, the Second Amendment, everybody wants to say Second Amendment. It doesn't give you the right. It doesn't give,
and we know that we know that for fact, right? Based on James Madison wrote all the amendments, for the Constitution. There are 2 things that tell us that. First is that Article 1, Section 8, subsection 15 and 16 say that Congress has the power to determine how the militia is armed, how they're trained, what they're wearing, everything, right? Like everything, it goes to Congress, right? Says they can do that with the military, they can do that with the militia. And then the second way we know that is that that original amendment, which was originally our 4th Amendment, when Madison wrote it, the founders rejected his original interpretation. So I'm going to read what he originally wrote what became the Second Amendment to be. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. A well-armed and well-regulated militia be in the best security of a free country, but no person religiously scrupulous of bearing arms shall be compelled to render military service in person. Right? The very first sentence is the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The founders said, fuck that.
And they wiped that shit.
And the second sentence was a well-regulated militia, which is what you see in the Texas Constitution and many state constitutions, right? If the founders wanted it so that you as an individual had arms, they would have kept Madison.
Exactly. So
instead, they wanted it to be the militia shall not be infringed. And that's how it's interpreted until Heller.
Right, interpreted. But at the same time, what federal amendment, because everybody wants to say it's our God-given right in America Constitution and everything. It says nowhere in the Constitution that civilians should own these weapons. That is state. So if we go and we add another amendment, which I know how crazy that would be, 2/3, yada, 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 all that shit. But we could literally write in in an amendment that says, okay, you can have firearms, but you have to go through background checks, waiting periods, red flag laws. You have to safe store and everything. And that would not be unconstitutional.
No.
Anything that the states put, if the states wanted to say you have to be 36 and have one leg and only eat on Tuesdays to own a gun, that would not be unconstitutional.
The original state constitution of Pennsylvania actually had language to forbid the village idiot from owning a gun, right? Which is what in Heller, Antonin Scalia actually references, right? Because he said that even though he said Heller gave you the right to constitutionally own a handgun, he said it did not allow you to own, like, weapons not in common use during the founder's time, which would include the M16 family of guns like the AR-15, and it could not be seen as long-standing prohibitions to criminals and those who are deemed mentally unfit from owning guns, right? And he wrote that into Heller, and a lot of these gun people don't want to talk about that part of Heller, where he said, you don't have a constitutional right to an AR-15, and you don't have a constitutional right if you're a criminal or mentally unfit.
So for those that are listening that don't know what the Heller is, you want to explain it in its entirety real quick?
Yeah. So like this is a fun case. So first of all, the NRA did not support Heller going forward, right? And the reason is that this case went forward by a guy. The guy's name was Dick Heller. It was Heller versus DC. Heller was sketchy as fuck. Okay. And people knew it. And so the NRA was afraid that if this court case went all the way to the Supreme Court, that it was going to be a blow to gun rights for decades, that they were not going to side on the side of guns. And, because of who Heller supposedly was, because Heller worked as a security guard in DC, and under DC's laws, that meant that he had to turn his gun into his employer before he went home. Right. Well, there were rumors that Heller was a drug dealer, and that's why he wanted a gun. He argued he needed a gun because people knew he was a security guard and they were going to kill him, right? So he needed a gun to protect himself. But rumors and allegations started coming out that Heller was actually a drug dealer, and that's why he needed the gun, because he was getting beat up and robbed when he's selling drugs, and he wanted the gun to protect himself during those drug sales. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. It goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and the conservative court rules that you have a constitutional right to a handgun. Antonin Scalia, who is not the most conservative, but one of the most conservative justices at the time, I would say that Alito is probably still more conservative, and so is Thomas. But Antonin Scalia was like Thomas and Alito, right? He writes the majority opinion and says you have a constitutional right to own a handgun, that the Constitution gives that. And he bases it on the idea that because it was militia service, but the original founding fathers were not going to give you a gun, it was just expected you would have your own weapon to bring to the militia, that meant that you could have a weapon that was in common use during the founding fathers' time, right? And that's important language, because he goes on to say that it does not allow you to own anything not in common use, including the family of M16 style rifles that are popular today. And he says if that makes it where you cannot fight the military, then that's just your luck. You're just shit out of luck, because you can only have what was, in common use. But they ignore all the rest of that rights.
Let me ask you real quick. Was a 9mm in common use during the founding fathers' time?
No, but what he argued is a pistol was. So a pistol would still be. So basically, he said that the Constitution, he only mentioned a handgun, right? Because pistols were common. You could basically then infer that a shotgun or a hunting rifle and a pistol you were legally allowed to have any of those. Right.
And how did he deem that it was constitutional? Because like we just said earlier, right? Nowhere in the Constitution does it say that a civilian can. That would be your states' rights.
Right.
And so how did he argue that?
He doesn't have any real justification. He bases it instead on British common law, which is where a lot of our constitutional concepts come from, and the ideas of self-defense and things in British common law. He literally ignores all the precedents. So let's talk about some court cases, right? In this one case called Cruikshanks versus the United States. This takes place in Louisiana during Reconstruction, right? Right after slavery. So following slavery, every slave state banned concealed and open carry, every one of them across the country. Okay. And, they say, that this is predicted from the Dred Scott decision, which happened
Right.
in 1854, where, they said in that, a freed slave is not a citizen, but if they ever became citizens, they would have all rights. And then they included the phrase, including the right to bear arms. Right. They specifically wrote that. So then when the Civil War ended, every state that had slavery banned open and concealed carry. Then in Louisiana during Reconstruction, when Black Americans began to get firearms, I don't remember the hate group, but we'll call them the KKK. Okay. They go around and they begin to disarm all the Black residents of their guns. They take their guns from them. Okay. It goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court rules that the Second Amendment is not an individual right to firearm ownership, it is a state right to a militia. And because these people are elected officials of the state, they can determine who has guns and who doesn't. Right. And so we see this over and over and over. Anytime there's a gun case, they pretty much say that the Second Amendment just prevents the federal government from infringing on the states.
Right.
And in fact, in 1977, Chief Justice Warren Burger, who at the time was the most conservative member of the court, said that the idea that the Constitution grants an individual right to firearms is the greatest fraud perpetuated against the American people.
Exactly. So why? And I know the answer, right? But why is this? Why are these even issues if over and over it's been shown that it's not a constitutional right?
I'll give you a hint: 6 inches in green. Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Money, right? Like It's always about money. And the NRA is really good about giving out money to people. Right.
Well, especially after mass shootings like Uvalde, like Sandy Hook, like that and everything, because then they start saying, oh, they're going to take all your guns away. So more people go out and buy guns. Then more money hits the NRA. The NRA pays more politicians even more. And then it's just a vicious circle, which leads to more mass shootings, which leads it just round and round we go.
During Barack Obama's time, the gun industry grew 158%, right? Because a Black man was in office, right?
Imagine that.
And he was a Democrat. And so it was so that rhetoric about the NRA saying they're coming to get your guns was so prevalent all the time that the New Yorker started running cartoons, political ad cartoons saying it's the annual Obama's coming to get your gun sale, right? Because that was the rhetoric. It's like, when Barack Obama got elected, the NRA said he's going to be the most anti-gun president in the history of the United States. And so gun sales skyrocketed. Add into that the racism of he's not a real American, right? Because he's not born in America.
We all remember the birth certificate bullshit.
Right. That Donald Trump pushed. Right. Let's not forget
that.
He didn't create it. He didn't create the birther argument, but he was the biggest proponent for it. He was the person who pushed it the most, to the point that Barack Obama responded to him at one of the correspondence dinners and made a joke and was like, I'm going to release my birth video, and showed a clip from The Lion King. Right.
Which is the only way you handle that situation. That's the only way you handle it.
But we saw it grow, and then Donald Trump gets elected. And the first time in history, after a mass shooting, we don't see gun sales explode. Right?
What, Parkland?
Parkland. Yep. Gun sales actually just fall. Right. And it's not until the pandemic happens and they're able to push those racist narratives again that we see gun sales explode again. Right. Because Donald Trump begins to say, the gangs are going to cross over from Mexico and come into the suburbs, and Black Lives Matter is going to spill into the suburbs, and it's going to be violence everywhere.
And let me just say this for anybody that isn't aware. Do you know where Mexico gets its guns? I'll give you a hint.
Because I could tell them, but you tell them.
Yeah.
Tell them where Haiti gets theirs.
These countries, they get their guns from us. And by us, I mean the US. That is where the guns come from.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
So any guns that are going over there that come back, they're just coming back home, baby. They're just coming back to the homeland.
Like 70% of all guns confiscated at the United States-Mexican border are confiscated as they're leaving the United States to go into Mexico. That's what funds the drug cartels, right? Leaving the United States. Same thing with Haiti, right? The Haitians that are revolutionaries there come over to the United States, buy guns, go back, right? Like that was all these, guerrilla warfare people. They come here. Venezuela, they come here, right? Get the guns, go back, because it's so fucking easy to get a gun in the United States.
Yeah.
And it's the same like even in the United States, right? Like it's the same even in the United States.
Oh yeah. Any gun show. Go to any fucking gun show.
Yeah, like you can go to a gun show and, let's say I own a gun store, right? Like I sell guns for a living. I can write some paperwork and date it a year ago and say that I transferred the guns that are in my store to my private collection, right? Take them to the gun show and sell them as a private citizen. I am no longer, in most states, no longer required to do a background check.
Yeah, you owning a gun store could bypass the whole having to have an FFL by literally just saying that. And an FFL is a federal firearms license. Yeah. Oh, it's just my private collection. I collect these things.
Yeah.
Which I could have understood that, like when back in the day, when, the muskets, like, oh, this is a musket handed down. I could even see that for like collector's purposes, but yeah, you're selling your AR-15 as a collector's item. What's so collector about it? Because you have a fucking My Little Pony fucking skin on it. Like, what's the fucking collector's value of these things?
Okay, so that just reminded me of Sacha Baron Cohen. Did you ever watch the This Is America? Did you ever watch that? And where he did the Kindergartens program, and I can't remember who the senator or representative that he got on board, but they put guns in like stuffed animals to sell to kids, right? Like, and there was a unicorn Uzi, right? Like it was a firearm inside of a unicorn for little girls to play with. And then there was a bear with a pull string that was a 9mm.
Dude, and honestly, like Sacha Baron Cohen is the best at satirical shit and getting people. But at this point, it's not even satirical, because Marjorie Taylor Greene said that if our kids would have had an AR,
the JR-15, the Junior 15,
if our kids would have had a miniature version of an AR-15, that they would still be alive. This isn't satire. Like, this was fucking said. And the fact that a congressperson would even say that is just fucking beyond me. But then if you think about it, after our shooting, what did all these Congress people wear on their lapel? What did all these Republicans wear?
They put that AR-15 on their lapel.
They put the AR-15 pin. But after this assassination attempt on Trump, have you seen one? No. Nobody's talking about it. But look at all the pictures lately. Do you see that? And this is the type of shit that makes me want to take a toaster bath.
Yeah.
Literally.
Love, laugh, toaster bath. Yep. Right there.
Because they care more about the fucking money.
They do. And while, to just, spread the love, while it is overwhelmingly Republicans, like 88, 89% of what the NRA gives out goes to Republicans, some Democrats benefit too. Absolutely. Right across the state line in Georgia from me is Sanford Bishop, and he is the highest paid Democrat from the NRA. They give him it's not very much in the grand scheme of things of what they give out, considering they give like millions of dollars a year to Ted Cruz, but they give him like $200,000 a year, right? Like,
I'll even take it even further. So our representative, who actually he's a Democrat, right? He's not running again. This was his last session, who put up the raise the age bill because he lives in Uvalde and everything, has an A rating from the NRA. Like, and is a Democrat. So, and I will be the first one to tell people, like, fuck both parties.
Yeah. Well,
Now,
even Tim Walz, who's currently, you know, the governor of Minnesota, up until Las Vegas, had an A rating. Now, after Las Vegas, when he saw that tragedy happen, he donated all the money the NRA gave him to charities. But before that, he had an A rating as a Democrat.
Yep. And you know, I've heard the story. He's told the story of why he changed, because his daughter asked him to. It took a kid. And that's the thing. These kids are fucking tired of this shit. These kids are tired of these active shooter trainings that, one, don't work, because let's be honest, all of my son's classroom, room 111, we're all sitting ducks in a fucking corner. But two, it's a mind fuck to the, like, it's hurting them psychologically that this is the world that we live in. And instead of telling adults not to buy these weapons, we tell kids, try to protect yourself when they're coming in your classroom. Yeah. This is what the American government says to our kids, that these old crusty white people, well, people in general, but it's always them that make these fucking laws. Their right to own a gun is worth more than your life as a fourth grader, as a fifth grader, as a sixth grader.
Donald Trump said it best, right? Like, you just got to get over it.
Oh, Charlie Kirk says, oh, that's the price you pay.
Yeah.
For freedom.
The price you pay for freedom, right? Like,
my son's life is the price.
Yeah.
He didn't pay no price.
A child's life is the price you pay for freedom, and we should just get over it, right? And that's what we're told. It could have been worse, right? Like, it's that, all of those things. Oh, and then the guy from Tennessee who was like,
we ain't doing shit.
Lots of ways.
Here's the thing, and this is what pisses me off, is because none of those people that have said this shit would have said it to my face, would have said it to one of these other parents' face. They say these things where they're away from people, where they're hiding by people that actually believe the same thing. But tell me, would Greg Abbott come and say it to my face? No. Would they say it to your face?
They also haven't experienced it, right?
No. And thank God, right? I will be the first one to say it. I don't want anybody. I fucking hate Greg Abbott with a passion. And I never want him to experience this.
Agreed.
I never want him to experience this. I don't want Trump to experience this. I don't want Marjorie Taylor Greene to experience this. All of these people that I loathe and I fucking can't stand, I don't want this to happen to them. But they don't care that it happened to us.
Right. And I think that's the difference, right? Like, that's the difference. Going back to what you said a few minutes ago, though, about a constitutional, right, change, right? Like, let's just think about, like, nationally, and how young people are also tired of it. I say all the time that if gun owners and pro-gun people do not come together with just the average person to stop these events from happening, the younger generations are going to take that
everything away. Yep.
Because they are tired of it. I hear it all the time. And they will start a convention of the states and pass a constitutional amendment that fundamentally changes what the Second Amendment says. Well, and it may even just take guns away completely.
And you know what they're called, right? They're called generational lockdown, because they grew up with these lockdown drills. They've grown up with these instances of mass violence and their friends dying and everything like that. And they're sick of it. They're sick of it. So yes, unless these people come together with us, who, you know, the numbers don't lie. What was it, like 76%? You're the numbers dude, but I think it was like 76% of people want an assault weapons ban, which is like 3/4 of the American people, which in any other fucking time period, if 3/4 of America wanted something, we would.
And among gun owners, it was like half of gun owners, a little over half of people who, like, pro-gun people, even said, yeah, you can get rid of that. Right.
Yeah. Even the Republican numbers were high.
Yeah.
You know, if the majority of the people want something, why do our people in power not give it to us? Like, it's why?
You know, it comes down to, I think, two things, like the money, And the other thing is that they're afraid of not getting reelected, right? Like they're there for a job. They're not there to actually serve us. They're there to get that paycheck and those kickbacks and all those other things, right? And so they won't buck the trend. They're going to go along, and I say this all the time, like Republicans really are the only ones that ever passed gun control because they know the Democrats are going to get blamed for it. And because Democrats know they're going to get blamed for it, they don't even try.
Yeah. Well, here's the
They'll
thing.
talk a good game as they're running for election, but then they don't do anything about it.
I'll even add a third option to that, right? Is because if they can create this false division amongst us, then we never come together. And by saying, "Oh yeah, well, half the people don't want this," when in reality it's not. Like we've seen the numbers. Most people want better laws. Most people do. Most people want an assault weapons ban. But if they can control the narrative and divide us even more and keep pushing this bullshit, then we never truly come together. And that's the fucking problem. Because I might not agree with what somebody says, but I can respect it enough, right? Like I don't expect to agree with what everybody says. The world would be boring in that case, right? Like if everybody just had followed the same line, believed in everything. It's like me. I'm atheist. I can respect your religion. It's not for me, but I can respect it. And I can respect other people's thoughts and ideologies and everything. But when these people in power keep spewing this rhetoric to keep us divided and keep, oh, this side's bad, this side's bad, when most people just want to live without being shot, then it keeps the gun industry in business.
Yeah.
And it's completely frustrating.
And this, has been a question that I often ask my students, right? Because I teach a course called Guns and Society. And one of the questions that I pose to them is, who does the NRA actually serve? They claim they serve gun owners, right? But do they? Or is it really the gun manufacturers that they serve?
Yep. It is. It's the gun manufacturers. And then it's irritating, and I'm riled up right now, so I might not get the correct term right off the bat, but qualified immunity also protects the gun industry, where you can't sue the gun manufacturers, correct?
Yeah, so qualified immunity, that would be with the law enforcement, but they passed the law. Yeah, they passed the law.
Oh, PLACA. It's PLACA.
Yeah.
It's PLACA.
Yeah. PLACA. Yeah, to prevent you from suing gun manufacturers for, anything that liability that they might have that leads to a death. And I think that's absurd.
And I'm just pulling it up real quick to PLACA means the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act.
Yeah.
Which was passed in 2005, which is really like ironic coincidental thinking of the time, right? They passed this in 2005. What ended in 2004?
Yep. And let's talk about that, right? Like, because the semi-automatic weapons ban was in effect from 1994 to 2004. There were only roughly 7 deaths per year before the ban went into effect. It dropped down to about 5 a year while it was in effect. And since it's come off of being in effect, it's like 30 a year, like, people actually dead, right? On average. And it just keeps going up because every year there's bigger and bigger of these tolls, and it gets worse and worse, right? So, the ban, though, while the period of the ban had the lowest rate of mortality, which means the ban did something, right?
It worked.
The
numbers don't lie.
And, there could have been a lot of other things to kind of explain that, but I don't know. Like, correlation may not be causation, but that's pretty strong and compelling.
And not just that, but let's try it again. If people are so sure it won't work, well, then why not try it?
And we're both gun owners, right? Like, full disclosure to any of our listeners, right? And I would give up everything I own if it meant that I didn't have to see another child die.
Absolutely.
Like, my toys are not worth someone else's pain.
Absolutely. And most people agree. That's the thing. So I've had people, when I did my last sit out at the police station, right? I had this guy come up. His wife stopped first. She was talking. They knew who I was. They heard the news, ban assault rifles. They were AR owners and everything. But the wife stopped and talked to me, called her husband to come and talk to me. This dude walked up. He's a Trumper. He was wearing a fuck Joe Biden hat. That's the hat he was wearing. At first, I'm like, well, this is going to be fucking fun, right? By the time he left, he agreed with 99% of things that I said. And I'll just throw it out here real quick so that everybody can hear. If you're afraid of a background check, you don't need a gun. If you cannot wait a mandatory waiting period, you don't need a gun. If I want a gun right now and I went out and bought one and they said, oh, it takes 60 days. Okay. It's the people that are doing nefarious things that are like, no, I need it right now. Right? Safe storage. He agreed with. When you actually sit down and have these conversations, people actually agree. It's when the media uses these trigger words and catchphrases and everything to keep people divided. And the fact of the matter is that he even said by the time he left, and this guy his dad was a arms trainer in the military. He was in the military, everything. You don't use an AR to protect your house. I asked him, I said, what would you use? My pistol. Okay, cool. So it's not for home protection. You're not killing hogs, because that's what everybody in Texas says. Oh, we need them to shoot hogs. So you're not doing that. Like I said, home protection, you're shooting your neighbors and your family if you're using an AR in your house. All of these things, though, at the end of our conversation, he walked away agreeing with 99%.
Yeah.
Even the assault weapons ban, he agreed. And I'm telling you, this dude was a full-on Trumper, MAGA, MAGA, MAGA. Like I said, he had a fuck Joe Biden hat on and walked away agreeing with 99% of what I said. And it's because conversations need to be had where we sit down and have these conversations. And one of the things that I said to him, though, I just said this. I said, look, you can walk away right now thinking that I'm an idiot. I don't care. Say, you can go home and think on what we've talked about. And if you come to the conclusion, then if you've actually sat down and thought about it and you come to the conclusion, even better, right? Or what's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to go home, think about our conversation, and even agree with me even more. Like, these are the things. People have to open their ears and listen.
Well,
that's it.
One of my early interviews was actually with the NRA, right? Like, they brought me on one of their podcasts, radio show things that they did. And they thought they were going to have this gotcha with this liberal professor, right? And by the end of it, I had convinced the host to agree with pretty much everything I said, right? And then their listeners also agree with me, to the point that that's why the NRA, like when I tag them and shit, they don't respond to me at all, right? And it's because they know that I know, like, a way to speak about these things, to say, hey, we need these laws and here's why, and it makes sense. And I say it as a gun owner.
It started as what, though? Just a conversation.
Yep.
It started as a conversation.
Yep. And which is why I think, like, the research that, Terrence, Amy, and I do is so important, because, like, what we look at is dispelling myths, right? Like, a lot of what we do is dispelling myths, because if you're going to come to a conversation with somebody who owns a gun and say, you only own a gun because you're a coward, or you only own a gun because you got a small dick, right? And none of that is true, then they're not going to fucking listen to you, right? Like, they're going to be, like, immediately turned off, right? Yeah. So, like, our research is super important, because we're getting rid of those myths, and we can be like, hey, look, here's what we know guns do. Here's what we know guns don't do. This is what's happening. How can we stop this from happening while you get to enjoy your right? Right. And when you come to them with that kind of conversation, they often will be like, you know what? That makes sense. And that's why I have so many, like, crazy pro gun people that follow me on TikTok, because I'm not advocating necessarily to ban things. Right.
Right.
I'm just saying that's going to come if we don't do something.
Yeah. Well, and then like I even have this thought, right? People that want the AR super bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where do you use them, right? Like where do you practice, right? Most of the times it's at a range, right? You're practicing in a range, playing at the range, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be such a bad thing if we do an AR ban, but if you go to a range where people are licensed and qualified and can watch you and can help you, and you can play Rambo all day long?
Yeah.
Why would that be an issue? You still get to play with your toys. And hell, if you have one, you know, take it there, right? Lock it up, keep it there. You can play with it there.
And
Why would that be
I
an
get
issue?
the appeal, right? I get the appeal. ARs are fun to shoot. They really are, right? Because of the gas chamber release, right? Like there's almost no recoil. You can just shoot and it's fun. But that's also what makes them so dangerous in these mass shooting situations, right? Because you can aim and your gun's not going to move. The recoil, there's no recoil, right?
Right.
Like, and so like that's what makes them so dangerous. My fun time is not worth somebody's life.
Well, you know who also thought that guns were or and the AR was fun? Our shooter. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like it yeah. I mean, and I'm not saying every AR owner is gonna mass shoot. I'm not. I'm not even saying the majority. Like I'm not gonna say stupid shit. But when most of these, and I'll just say school shootings, right? School shootings are carried out with this gun because it is so easy to use. And these people think it's fun. And these people want their Rambo moments and they want to feel godlike. And that's what these ARs make you feel is, oh, I got my Rambo moment. I'm this badass. And those moments end up with children like my son dead
Yeah.
who do not get to celebrate their 13th birthday. And it's heartbreaking. But like you said, nobody's toys is worth somebody else's life. And that's what these things are. You know, tool, toys, weapon, whatever you want to call it. It's all one and the same. They are not worth children's lives.
Not at
Full
all.
stop.
So we're coming down to the last 15 minutes. I did want to talk about that uh news story I mentioned to you right before we went live on the air about the parent that lost their child in the Denver
Right.
5 Points neighborhood shooting, right?
Yep.
Who is now arrested and charged with murder.
Yeah. That
Vigilante justice for those that are just joining. So this I'm not going to name him because now he's a shooter. He shot and killed his the person that he blamed for murdering, his family member, right? I can't remember who it was. His son blamed his
right.
for the murder of his son, right? Um so this was the Denver shooting last year, okay? Um and apparently did not feel that law enforcement and the system was doing a good enough job to uh you know do something about the person that he blamed for killing his child, and he took justice into his own hands and did it. But and he used a gun. And so to me, um that there's a part of me that I can completely like understand why he did it, right? Because God knows if something happened to one of my kids, there's no telling what I would do, right?
Right.
Like there's no telling what I would do. I can't say what I would or wouldn't do. Okay.
Right.
So I can kind of get that. But there's another part of me that's like, that doesn't solve the problem, right?
Yeah.
It might take out the one person who hurt your family member, but it doesn't actually that person doesn't then pay, right? This is why I'm also kind of like not really for the death penalty in a lot of cases, because then it's over, it's done, right? Like there's no reflection. They don't get time to think about what the hell that they did and like pay back the community for what they did, right?
Right.
We still live on with it, right? And so, what are your thoughts?
So I want to start by saying something, and then I'll go into it. Nobody deserves to be a victim of gun violence. And this is me saying this after 2 years, therapy, depression meds, all sorts of shit. Do I understand the want for vigilante justice? Absolutely. I understand that 100%. I understand beating the shit out of them, right? All for it. And I try not to preach violence. But nobody deserves to be gunned down. And that's just how I feel. And it's taken me years to you would have caught me 2 years ago, I would have agreed right out. Like, hell yeah, justice, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, that just takes out the perpetrator. That doesn't fix the system that has allowed this to happen. And that is what we tried to do. My wife and I and everybody at our nonprofit, Rise for You, is what we try to do is fix the system. Because an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. We already know this. So we have to go after and fix the cause to change the effect. But huff huff blow your house down doesn't solve anything. Did it make that father feel good in the moment? I'm sure it did. I'm sure for a split second there was a bit of justice that he accrued. I'm sure of it. But then after that moment, now he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. And what did that do? It didn't bring his child back.
Yep.
And that is the one thing that I think about all the time. Nothing, and I know I sound like a broken record, but nothing I say or do can bring my son back. But we will change the world in my son's name. In Uziyah's legacy, that will change the world. And that isn't me going physically after the police who felled him. That doesn't get me nothing except locked up. And then what good am I? What good am I? This man, I feel for this man's child who was murdered, not just because he was murdered, but now his dad doesn't get the chance to make real changes in his son's name. And that is a pity to me. And it's a whole fucked up situation through and through. And this is why we say that your toys are not worth lives, because not just one life was ended by gun violence. Then retribution happened, and then now that's two. And it didn't solve anything. So I know we're getting on to our last few. And so with my last thoughts, I just want to double down real quick. It didn't bring his son back. We can't change things by an eye for an eye. We have to change the system. We have to change the root. We have to change hearts and minds. That is what we have to change. Will we ever be gun violence free in our lifetime? Probably not. But our grandchildren deserve it. Our great grandchildren deserve it. And through Uzi, we will achieve that. And that is why we do what we do. We talk about how we talk. We share Uziyah everywhere, because Uziyah will outlast me. He'll outlast you. He'll outlast my other kids. He'll outlast my grandchildren. And he will be a part of the reason why this world becomes a safer place. And that's all we want, is a safer place where nobody has to feel this pain.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to echo that sentiment. I mean, first I want to say, like, we're getting close to Uzi's birthday. So I'm just going to say happy birthday, because he's still there in spirit, right? Like,
Yeah.
and always be there with you. And you have to like hold on to good memories, right?
Yeah.
To stay sane, right? And he should be here to celebrate it. He should be
Absolutely.
here to celebrate that 13th birthday, right? Like, and it's infuriating that we still see these events day after day, year after year, 2 years later, right?
Yep.
The other thing that you were kind of touching on is that like we do this so that other people don't have to go through it, right?
Yeah.
Because I may not be the person to pull the trigger, but if I don't do everything I can to prevent someone else who might,
Yep.
then I'm just as responsible as the person who pulled the trigger, right?
100%.
I'm complicit in those behaviors. And that's why, like, after Sandy, I used to own a lot of guns, right? Like, let's have some full disclosure from my final thoughts. At
Yeah.
one point, my roommate and I had around 20 rifles, many of those things like the AR-15, right? They're
Right.
military style rifles, and 4 handguns. Okay. Then Sandy Hook happened. And suddenly, like, little kids, right? Um, are killed, and I'm like, I can't be complicit in a hobby that you know causes the death of little children, right?
Right.
So I sold all my guns. I wish I could say I gave them away or donated them to be destroyed or something like that. I didn't. I sold them to a gun store, but I got rid of all my guns, like every single one. And I didn't buy another one until the pandemic happened, because I just refused to own one. I would go to a gun range still, went like, every other week or whatever, would rent a gun, use it at the range, and then go home. And then the pandemic happened and ammunition went through the roof. The cost of renting the guns went through the roof. Everything went skyrocketed. And I was spending where I used to spend $150 at the range, I was spending $500. I'm like, I could just buy the gun and buy my own ammunition
Right.
and save the money. And so that's how I became a gun owner again. But I don't keep ammunition at home because I don't believe you can use a gun to defend yourself. And I think the data backs that up, right? I don't have that Rambo mentality, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the problem is that so many of the people that, like guns think that they're a superhero. They watch too many movies like Die Hard or Lethal Weapon or, whatever, the fuck is out there, right? And they
Right.
don't actually, realize that that's all make believe, right?
Yeah.
That's not how it works. And that this is just like a very lethal hobby for the most
Yeah.
part, right? They're toys that are very lethal. And, if you have nothing, like to hide, restrictions aren't going to hurt you, right?
Not at
Like,
all.
like even if you had to do mental health checks, right? Like there may be times where your therapist is like, you know what? You don't need a gun for a couple of weeks till we get you straightened out. But most people would be able to go back. Like, so unless you actually had something that would actually make you a threat, it wouldn't affect most people. But the people who would affect, children may stay alive, right? We may
Yep.
see fewer of these events. And no law will stop every instance, right? Like, and I want to say that's what I want to end on. That's what I want to land my plane. Like, no law is going to stop every instance of gun violence, right? Because there are always going to be, people who the laws don't catch or are able to evade the laws, right? But to quote Ronald Reagan, we like when he wrote the letter to Congress to ban the AR-15, he said, while we recognize that banning these weapons will not stop all crime used with these weapons, it will dry up the supply enough to make that crime negligible, right? And that's Ronald Reagan, the Republican darling, right? Like the idea is that if we put restrictions in place, right, a gun owner who is legal and responsible won't have any problems with it. It might make an extra hoop to jump through, right? But it's not going to prevent you from having a gun. But if it does prevent somebody who's dangerous from having a gun, it's worth it. And so that's what I'm going to end on. And I'm just going to say, join us next week as we come back with more stories from the Cold Dead Hands. And, hopefully we reach a point in our history where we don't have any more stories to tell. But until that day, signing off.
This has been Stories from the Cold Dead Hands with Dr. Benjamin Dowd-Arrow and Brett Cross. Hopefully one day we will not have any stories to tell. But until that day arrives, remember to love one another and be kind to each other. Until next week, signing off.